Okay, so I'm recording this for people that aren't here. What we're going to do is I want to have a look at one of the practice questions. Specifically, what I wanted to do was just tackle today the 4 roles of government, and then tomorrow have a look at some of the tax things.
Did you give us practice?
Yep. So the question today is on role of the government. I'm going to tackle one of the roles of government, and I'm going to leave the other 3 for you to have a look at how I've done this and then sort of make adjustments. What I would recommend is when we're looking at the role of government, the textbook's a really good resource for this, okay? And they give really good detail. From page 190, textbook, right through to, the whole chapter, but specifically for the role of government, through to 195, it goes through each of the 4 roles in really good detail. And especially if we're thinking about an extended answer, we're going to have to give those nice detailed responses. So I'd recommend, what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to have a look at the role, the textbook section for the role that I'm looking at. I'd advise you to do the same if you're thinking about the other 3, okay? So the 4 roles of government in order are the provision of public goods and services. 2, the redistribution of income. 3, the regulation business enterprises. And number 4, macroeconomic management.
Is that the size?
No. Macroeconomic management is like, remember we were talking about dulling the curves in the business cycle, trying to flatten out that a little bit more? Okay.
It's like reducing the gap between income and wealth, isn't it?
That's income redistribution.
Making sure that it's consistent growth on the line.
Yeah, making sure that our economic growth is as close to trend as possible, that we aren't hit too hard by economic shocks, and that booms don't spiral out of control. I can go through that in more detail, that's all good. Now, what I was going to focus on, for the purpose of this lesson, was I was going to focus on the redistribution of income. Is everyone happy for me to do that, or would you like me to do a different one?
Yeah, do this.
Okay.
Oh, are you just doing like crash courses?
I understand that.
Not necessarily a crash course, but there is this is one of the practice questions, so I was just going to show you how you can go about answering it. Okay. Okay, Jess, on your time. When I find my... Low key?
But I also just know I wouldn't actually use it.
You do during exams.
Is this for the
Oh.
which practice question is this for?
No, it's not for a specific.
Oh, okay.
So, this potential question is this.
Sorry, were the practice questions on like yesterday's?
Mm-hmm.
Are those textbook pages like the old one or the new one?
You on?
The title is called. Yeah. Oh. Oh, did you do it all offline? No, I did the on or
Well, there's hardly anything
Oh.
macroeconomic.
Yes, which I'll go through in more detail. Okay. So looking at this question, there are two succinct parts to it. Can someone tell me what they are?
Income redistribution.
Describe two ways a government can.
Yep. So we can see pretty clearly, this question has two command terms.
Outline.
Cool. So there are two parts. First off, we want to outline what income redistribution is, why it's important. Secondly, how the government does it using its spending powers. Okay? So there's a couple of things for us to run through here. First off, we'll look at income inequality. Because that's primarily, what we're talking about in the question. The only reason why the government needs to redistribute income is because there is some level of income inequality that exists. Can anyone give me, a reason why income inequality is apparent?
Generation.
It was like one thing was like you were like given opportunities and stuff.
Generation.
All right, one cause
Education and training.
is, yeah, that definitely comes into it. But I'll just go off what Jess is saying is inequality of opportunity.
Oh, also like disabilities.
Yeah. So inequality of opportunity are things that occur that are completely outside of your control. Okay? It's your parents' income and education. It is your parents' level of income, the place you were born, your gender, your race, your ethnicity. All these things are outside of your control and can have some impact on inequality. Think of purely by virtue of where most of us, we're all born, okay, and the opportunity we have to attend this school versus people who are born in significantly different conditions which are considerably worse off. It's not something to feel guilty about necessarily, but it's something to acknowledge that we are incredibly fortunate. And we need to know that structural issues like this do impact inequality. Now, of course, there are other reasons. We can say that different levels... Taxation will come into it. Different levels, I was thinking of like ownership, of wealth and ownership.
Like things getting passed, like properties and
Yeah, it could be inheritances, could be anything alike. Discrimination that exists. And then, unequal status and power. Now, I'll stop there. There are obviously other reasons. This isn't an exhaustive list, but, these are certainly ways in which inequality is allowed to foster in a society. If we were in a perfectly equal world, everyone would have the same earning capacity, everyone would be able to earn the same income, but as we know, that is just not the case. For that reason, we stumble upon the government's objective, okay? It's important because you're specifically asked about what the government's objective is, it's important to include the fact that the government objective is to ensure that all Australians or all people in Australian society, correct, Okay, so essentially that's the first half of the question. Okay, done. We say why income inequality exists, or we acknowledge that income inequality exists, and then we say how the government looks to counteract it. Everyone happy with that?
So that's 2 marks there then.
Yeah.
So 1 mark for
Defining it and then
like what income distribution is, and then the other mark for talking about the income inequality.
I suppose because of the outline, right? Because you're giving, say, characteristics. Like, yeah, we've ticked that off because we've acknowledged what income inequality is, and then we've also acknowledged what the objective is. Any other questions about that before we move on? Cool. Okay, so we get into the second part here. And we've got 2 ways a government can use its spending powers. Can anyone think of how the government can try to achieve a reasonable minimum standard of living?
direct
Spending powers.
Yeah.
direct distribution.
Great. Yeah, Angelique, we're going to,
Oh, I was going to give an example of indirect distribution.
such as?
Providing public education.
Great. So yeah, as we've acknowledged, we've got these 2 different ways. So number 1, I'll just put spending powers here. Spending powers.
Or with direct transfer payment.
Yeah. So we've got direct transfer payment.
And then indirect transfer payments, which is like education.
So direct transfer is direct income support. Maybe it's the unemployment benefit. Maybe it's a pension. Whereas indirect payments are subsidised goods and services to provide equal access, e.g. education. Now, as this is a describe question, you would need to go into heaps of detail. You're just describing what the 2 spending powers are and how they can be used. Maybe you give me an example of each, as I've done in there. Liv.
So this is for the spending powers, and then if it was to say like through direct taxation,
Mm-hmm.
would you then talk about like the private income?
Yeah, so if the question, instead of spending powers, was through taxation powers, I'd say, sure, personal income tax, and I'd note how that is a progressive tax, so that people at higher incomes, pay high levels of tax, which then can be redistributed through the system. Is everyone happy about how they'd answer that question? Okay. Are there any more questions before we move on?
I've got a question. It's like not that related though.
Okay, can I just hold it for 1 second so I'm going to stop the recording? Has anyone got a question about this specifically? Cool. Okay, so I'll stop the recording.